last week we were talking about oaths, and we had a verse that talked about oaths and what to do if you don't keep your oath, the sacrifice. And that verse itself did not say it's a sin or that you have to keep an oath. But there are other verses in the Bible, so I looked those up. Because we talked about Jephthah and how Jephthah felt so strongly he had to keep the oath and ended up killing his daughter because of it. So in Numbers 30 verse 2 it says, if a man vows a vow to the Lord or swears an oath to bind himself by a pledge, he shall not break his word. He shall do according to all that proceeds out of his mouth. And then Deuteronomy 23:21 through 23 says, if you make a vow to the Lord your God, you shall not delay fulfilling it. For the Lord your God will surely require it of you, and you will be guilty of sin. But if you refrain from vowing, you will not be guilty of sin. You shall be careful to do what has passed your lips. For you have voluntarily vowed to the Lord your God what you have promised with your mouth. So that's why Jephthah felt like he had to fulfill that oath, because it says you have to. But again, the penalty for not fulfilling the oath is you have to do this sacrifice. So sometimes Jephthah should have looked and said, I can't fulfill that oath, I will do this sacrifice instead. So,
and what was the verse in Numbers 30? What?
Numbers 30 verse 2.
Thank you.
So the second Deuteronomy says you don't have to give oaths. You don't sin if you don't give an oath.
I got that verse.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to start back in Leviticus. We're still on talking about sacrifices. Verses 1 and 2. 1 to
In chapter
7.
Verse 1 and 2.
Verse
This
1.
is the law of the guilt offering. It is most holy. In the place where they kill the burnt offering, they shall kill the guilt offering, and its blood shall be thrown against the sides of the altar.
Okay, so we learned about the guilt or trespass offering back in chapter 5. But here we learned that it had to be made at the altar of the burnt offering. So the one that was outside. The blood from this offering didn't have to come inside the tent. It was sprinkled around the altar. And by the way, the word for kill really it really means to slaughter, to cut the throat of an animal. So anytime you see the word kill in this chapter, it's slaughter that thing. Sounds pleasant. Okay, verses 3 through 5.
All its fat shall be offered, the fat tail and the fat that covers the inner parts, both kidneys with the fat on them near the loins, and the covering of the liver, which is to be removed with the kidneys. The priest shall burn them on the altar as an offering made to the Lord by fire. It is a guilt offering.
So again, back in chapter 5, the focus on the reasons why it would be, that focuses on the reasons why you would give the offering. Now it's more on how to, these are the instructions for the priest, how to do it, what to do with the blood, what to do with the fat. And we're starting with the fat. He's instructed to burn up all the fatty portions of the animal. Burn it all up. Verses 6 through 10.
Any male in a priest's family may eat it, but it must be eaten in the sanctuary area. It is most holy. The same law applies to both the sin offering and the guilt offering. They belong to the priest who makes atonement with them. The priest who offers a burnt offering for anyone may keep its hide for himself. Every grain offering baked in an oven or cooked in a pan or on a griddle belongs to the priest who offers it. And every grain offering, whether mixed with olive oil or dry, belongs equally to all the sons of Aaron.
Okay, so these verses we're kind of going through quickly because we've seen it all. Pretty much, yeah. It's been in previous chapters. We've seen this before. But here we get information that the priest that actually does the sacrificing, he gets to distribute the portions. The blood and the fat belong to God, and the meat portions were shared among the priests, and it had to be eaten inside the tabernacle, inside the courtyard. And the priest was also given the skin of the animal. He could use it however he wanted. He could use it to make leather. He could sell it. It was a way for them to have income, because remember, they will not get land when they get into the promised land. So this is how they support themselves. We saw the grain offerings back in chapter 2. And again, a portion of this is given to the priests. So this is how they get to eat. And it gives specific instructions that the priest who distributes the things has to do it equally. So he can't say, I like you better, you're getting a double portion. Everybody got the same amount. Okay, verses 11 through 14.
And this is the law of the sacrifice of peace offerings, that one may offer to the Lord. If he offers it from the thanksgiving, then he shall offer with the thanksgiving sacrifice unleavened loaves mixed with oil, unleavened wafers smeared with oil, and loaves of fine flour well mixed with oil. With the sacrifice of his peace offerings for thanksgiving, he shall bring his offering with loaves of leavened bread, and from it he shall offer one loaf from each offering as gift to the Lord. It shall belong to the priest who throws the blood of the peace offerings.
So we saw peace offerings back in chapter 3 and learned about that in great detail. But now we're learning that along with an animal sacrifice, they're to bring baked goods. Either unleavened cakes or wafers, and they're to be made with oil. But something absolutely new. They're to bring some leavened bread too. First time we've seen leavened bread at all. Apparently, the prohibition against leavened bread that we saw back in Leviticus 2:11 was referring to bread that would be any grain that would be burned on the altar. This one is not going to be burned on the altar. So when the priest gave the sacrifice, he had unleavened bread in one hand and leavened bread in the other hand. And the bread was offered as a heave offering. We've seen a wave offering. Wave offering is where they take it and kind of wave back and forth. This one is a heave offering where they take it and lift it up and bring it down, lift it up, like they're heaving it up to heaven. So why both kinds of bread? Symbolizes two things. God and man. The unleavened bread is symbolizes God and no sin. Leaven symbolizes sin. So the unleavened symbolizes God, free from all sin, and the leavened symbolizes man. And so putting them together symbolizes peace between man and God. So that's why both loaves of bread. Okay, verses 15 through 18. Do you want to? I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm so bad with names. Do you want to take that? Can you take that?
Me?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
15 through what?
18.
18. The flesh of the sacrifice of his peace offering for thanksgiving shall be eaten the same day it is offered. He shall not leave any of it until morning. But if the sacrifice of his offering is a vow or a voluntary offering, it shall be eaten the same day that he offers his sacrifice. But on the next day, the remainder of it also may be eaten. The remainder of the flesh of the sacrifice on the third day must be burned with fire. And if any of the flesh of the sacrifice of his peace offering is eaten at all on the third day, it shall not be accepted, nor shall it be imputed to him. It shall be an abomination to him who offers it, and the person who eats of it shall bear guilt.
Okay, so there were several reasons for a peace offering. You could give it as thanksgiving. You could give it as to show you fulfilled a vow, or just because. So if it was a Thanksgiving offering, you absolutely positively had to eat the whole thing that day. No leftovers. But if it was a vow or voluntary offering, you can eat leftovers the next day. But never, ever, ever on the third day. Ever. If it, at the end of the second day, if you hadn't eaten it all, you burned it up. It's kind of God's way of saying our relationship with him has to be fresh. It can't be old, it can't be stale. Plus, they didn't really have a good way of keeping meat for 3 days. So physically, it wouldn't be good to eat 3-day-old meat. Now, if they did eat even a bite of it on the third day, it nullified the whole sacrifice. It even made it where it was a sin, where whoever kept it for that third day, now they had to do a whole new sacrifice because they have a new sin.
Even if they kept it, but they didn't eat it.
Had to be burned up.
Wow.
Yep.
Okay.
Nullified. Says it's
In
tainted.
trash it goes.
Yep. Well, not even trash. Burn it.
Do you think God's serious about sin? All these details.
Could be. Yeah. Yeah. But you have to wonder if people kind of tested it. Yeah. Okay, verses 19 through 21.
Also the flesh that touches anything unclean shall not be eaten. It shall be burned with fire. As for other flesh, anyone who is clean may eat such flesh. But the person who eats the flesh of the sacrifice of peace offerings, which belong to the Lord, in his uncleanness, that person shall be cut off from his people. And when anyone touches anything unclean, whether human uncleanness or an unclean animal, or any unclean detestable thing, and eats of the flesh of the sacrifice of peace offerings which belong to the Lord, that person shall be cut off from his people.
Okay, here's more like, is God serious about sin? Yeah. The meat from the peace offering had to be eaten in a ceremonially clean manner, had to be kept ceremonially clean the whole time. Anyone eating the meat, they had to be ceremonially clean. If they weren't, it was a serious sin. Now, being unclean is not the sin, but eating the meat while you're unclean, that's the sin. If you're unclean, you are to get clean before. But there were natural things that happened that could make someone unclean. So, like if someone died and you touched them, or if an animal died and you touched them, you were unclean. Well, if an animal dies outside your tent, you had to pick them up and take them somewhere. So at that point, you're unclean. So there were ways to make yourself clean. Now, being cut off from his people, I was always taught that meant you're banished. But there's actually 5 possibilities. One of them is you were executed. That would be pretty serious by the community. The next one is God would execute you somehow. Another one is that they wouldn't be allowed to worship in the sanctuary. That seems like kind of mild compared to all the rest. The next one would be what I'd always been taught, is that you'd be banished from the community. You wouldn't be able to be part of the community. You had to go find your own way to live somewhere else. And then the last one is that your ancestral line would be terminated. It's called extirpation. Now, most of the commentaries I ran into said it meant execution, which is really, really strict. But it could be any. But then there were a lot that said excommunication. Whatever it is, it's severe. God's serious about it. I don't remember if we'll run into any examples of people that did it. It was a real deterrent. You didn't want to be doing this stuff. We're going to see 19 offenses that result in being cut off. You can bet people tried to avoid doing those things. Now, if they did it accidentally or unknowingly, there was a sacrifice for that. But if you knowingly did something, if you knowingly knew you were unclean and then ate one of these sacrifices, that's when the serious things would happen. It's not that God demands perfection. Leavened bread shows that. He knows we have sin in life. But if we receive spiritually clean things in an unclean way, we're out of fellowship with God. That goes for today. 1 John 1:6 says, if we say that we have fellowship with him and walk in darkness, we lie and do not practice the truth. Taking the Lord's Supper with unconfessed sin is like the Israelite who ate the sacrifice in a state of uncleanliness, and you can expect judgment from God. Okay, verses 22 through 24.
The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the people of Israel, saying, you shall eat no fat of ox or sheep or goat. The fat of an animal that dies of itself and the fat of one that is torn by beasts may be put to any other use, but on no account shall you eat it.
Okay, so under the old covenant, you could eat the fat of any kind of animal except an animal that could be a sacrifice. So an animal from the species. You couldn't eat the fat of a cow. You couldn't eat the fat of an ox or a sheep or a goat. I don't know what other kind of animals they would eat, but I guess
An animal found dead.
Roadkill.
Yeah.
But if it, but if it's a roadkill ox, sheep, or goat, no. I'm trying to think what other kind of animals are there that you would eat.
Rabbits and
Rabbit.
yeah.
I don't think we haven't seen a rabbit. Yeah, you could eat the fat of a rabbit or squirrels. No, there isn't. A snake,
The bird.
an alligator, a hippo, any of those things.
Camel.
Yeah, a camel. Although we'll find out a lot of those are unclean animals. You couldn't eat them anyway, but you could never eat the fat of these animals. Now, like we talked about last week, there is certain fat on animals you can't get out. Like marbled meat, you're not expected to dig out all the fat. It's the fat that lies against the organs that has to be cut out. But you could use the fat in other ways. Some of the ways they would use the fat is in medicines, in bandages, in candles. They even used it to start fires. So you could use the fat, just not eat it. Yeah. Although medicine, well, I wonder if the medicines, I'd have to look. I would imagine the medicines are the kind you would rub on because,
A salve.
yeah, salve. Yeah, nothing you could eat because then you'd be eating the fat. Fat represented goodness and abundance, and that belonged to God. And it also represented, well, it was the stored energy of an animal. And that belongs to God. And again, really strict penalty, cut off. So, didn't find too many people trying to eat the fat. Verse 26 and 27. Betty, I think that's you. Mm-hmm.
You are not to eat any blood, either of bird or animal, in any of your dwellings. Any person who eats any blood, even that person shall be cut off from his people.
Okay, serious.
This just all makes me so thankful I live on this side.
Yeah, you have to be careful. So blood represents the life of an animal, and life belongs to God. Medical science today shows that blood tends to become septic very soon after death, and it's dangerous. So here's another medical thing that God knows what he was doing. Don't eat it. There's spiritual, and then there's physical. Notice it says eat. But the Jehovah Witnesses use this verse among some others and take it a step further and say you can't take the blood of anything. So they cannot have blood transfusions at all. Nope. You have to have your own blood. Yeah, I've had
Old covenant, and then
we had a friend, a Jehovah's Witness friend, and his daughter absolutely needed a blood transfusion. And so he prayed and prayed, and he gave the blood transfusion and got cut off from the church. Yeah, you cannot, not in them, but that's not what it says, and that's not what it means. So today, there's some Jews that still try to keep up with all these dietary laws. In order for meat to be kosher, all the blood has to be removed. You know, when you have like a chicken and they got to get that all out. They avoid consuming fat. Many households won't use soap that contains any kind of animal fats. They believe to even use dishwashing soap that has any kind of animal fat when you're washing your dishes would make anything you put on that dish non-kosher. So they are trying, again, isn't it nice to be on the side of the cross? They seem to be taking a little further, but yeah, not have to worry about those kind of things. Okay, verses 28 through 31.
The Lord said to Moses, say to the Israelites, anyone who brings a fellowship offering to the Lord is to bring part of it as his sacrifice to the Lord. With his own hands he is to bring the offering made to the Lord by fire. He is to bring the fat together with the breast and wave the breast before the Lord as a wave offering. The priest shall burn the fat on the altar, but the beast belongs to Aaron and his sons.
Okay, so basically it's saying you cannot delegate an offering. You can't be the owner of a big business and say, I don't have time here, you go do this for me. You have to do it yourself. Another wave offering. But who's doing the waving here?
The person who brings it.
The person who brings it. This time it's not the priest who brings it, it's the person who brought it who's doing the waving. One of the commentaries said that what would happen is the priest would take the meat and lay it in the hands of the one doing the offering, and then put his hands under the offerer's hands and kind of show them what direction to do things, or so that it was done correctly.
So to get this straight, the person would bring the breast meat, it would be cooked, they would do the wave offering, and then they would give that breast to the priest Is that what this is saying?
So
Because
I'm not sure if it was cooked ahead of time,
oh,
but
okay.
it would have, since it's just the breast, it would have been cut.
But see, that's what it says in mine. But the breast shall belong to Aaron and his sons.
Yeah. So
Okay.
after it went to Aaron, and
Okay.
it went to the priest.
Was there a difference between the priests and the, which one of the families?
Son of Aaron.
Sons of Aaron.
Uh-huh.
Yes.
There was
The
a difference
the
between that
priests,
group and the
all priests had to come from the tribe of Levi.
Levites.
Aaron
Okay.
was descended from Levi, Moses' brother. So he and his sons were the special priests. But they had,
So there was two separate groups.
no, Aaron and his sons were also Levites. But they're within the group of Levites. Anyone that was not from Aaron's family, they were priests. But they didn't get to do a lot of the things.
Oh, because they were, okay,
They were still priests.
okay, got it.
But these are more like the bishops and the
So there was only one high priest,
one high priest.
and then some others
Yeah.
got to do some things.
Yeah.
And then another group.
Only Aaron and his sons and descendants could go into the tent at all. Only the high priest got to go behind the veil. Only Aaron and his sons got to do the sacrifices. But as far as clearing out ashes and stuff like that, I believe there were different priests.
Yeah, okay, got it.
They got to do the good stuff. Okay, verses 32 through 34.
You shall give the right thigh to the priest as a connection from the sacrifice of your peace offering. The one among the sons of Aaron who offers the blood of the peace offering and the fat. The rest shall be his and his portion. For I have taken the breast of the wave offering and the thigh of the combination of the sons of Israel from the sacrifice of the peace offering, and have given them to Aaron the priest and his sons as their due forever from the sons of Israel.
Okay, so the right thigh belonged to the priest who does the sacrifice. The right thigh is the most choice cut of meat for them. In 1 Samuel 9:24, Samuel gives a right thigh to Saul. It was special. Presumably the left thigh went to whoever brought the offering. And I looked it up to see, okay, what kind of cut is a thigh? It's a shank. So if you look for a shank, that's a thigh. The breast was done as a wave offering, and the thigh is a heave offering. So the breast was this way, and the thigh was this way. And yeah, and you better get it right. And both portions belong to God.
Aren't we glad that we live this
And we've got this in scripture to read, to follow the instructions, and they didn't have that. It said to all be,
Yeah.
Right.
they had to memorize it.
But the priests would be the ones that had to really know it,
The priest, yeah.
because the people.
But the people had to know what kind of sacrifice to
Right.
bring.
Yeah. Am I bringing a goat today, or a cat, or a bull? Or
It
Yeah.
seems to me like this took a
Makes
lot
my
of their
brain
time.
hurt.
Really, I'm thinking, was that so they didn't get into other trouble while they were doing all this?
Well, and a lot. It sounds like a lot of sacrifices. There was definitely a morning and an evening sacrifice every day, but all the other sacrifices depended on what people were doing. So,
And with 200,000 people,
million.
2 million people.
Yeah, but if you sinned,
And
Right,
there was only
sacrifice.
one place to do this.
one place.
So not everybody
One
did a
altar.
morning and evening.
No, just the high priest did a morning and an evening every day. And that,
Not brought by somebody, or that was just there.
no, yeah. And we see that happening, it happens as long as they have a temple. There's a morning and an evening sacrifice every day. All the other sacrifices were as needed. So as people sinned or they fulfilled a vow, or that's when they brought things. So
But if you have 2 million people, that's happening probably.
yeah, there's probably
24/7.
You
probably an
had to-
assembly line. Yeah, and they had to keep the fire burning 24/7, and so
Probably had to get up and get in line.
yeah.
Well, and
Yeah.
you think 2 million people, look how far they would have to come to the tabernacle,
Yeah,
some of them.
yeah.
And you couldn't send anybody.
I'm like Betty, I'm glad I live now.
You had to do it yourself. Yeah, so we are on this side of the cross.
They must have been overwhelmed by this. I can kind of see maybe why they would have rebelled.
Oh, yeah, why they would slip away.
Or slip away. I mean, because really, and I don't know.
Well, I can't do this today, so my
Right.
sin is going to be carried with me, and
Especially the further away from the temple you
Yeah.
might be.
Well, we know after Solomon and after the nations split in two, and later they weren't good. They didn't even know what the laws were,
yeah.
so they weren't doing this
That's
at
why
all.
the Pharisees made up their own.
They made up their own.
Yeah. So
They're
they
on the
weren't,
roll.
and we don't know how good they were at keeping this well. We know the morning and evening sacrifices happened kept, except for during that period of time where after Solomon, and they weren't doing things well at all. But when they were paying attention to the law, morning and evening sacrifice. And right now they are not doing that because they don't have a temple. If there were a temple, there'd be morning and evening sacrifices, and PETA would be really mad.
So I'm just thinking about us today, and like you say, being on this side of the cross. I guess as a Christian reading this, you think it would have been very hard. I mean, Christ paid our whole price.
Yeah.
You can see they were paying a price, so to speak. But for us, that's overwhelming to me, even thinking about it.
I think it's very purposeful in that was their way of trying to earn a relationship with God, and you can't earn a relationship with God.
You can't be good enough.
Yeah. So there are all these steps that this side of the cross we don't have.
And in scripture it says so many times, I don't want a sacrifice, I want your
Mercy.
obedience.
Mercy, not
Yeah.
sacrifice.
Yeah,
It seems like this
Yeah.
is a lot.
it was. Okay, verses 35 and 36 say, "This is the portion of Aaron and of his sons from the Lord's food offerings from the day they were presented to serve as priests of the Lord. The Lord commanded this to be given them by the people of Israel from the day that he anointed them. It is a perpetual due throughout their generations." Sometimes you might think, well, with all those sacrifices, that's a lot of meat these guys are getting. And meat was a luxury. And yeah, it seems like they get a lot of it. But again, they don't get land.
How
God
many
is-
priests do you think there, how many would have been?
Um,
Thousands or hundreds or
The Levites being
a whole tribe?
a 12th of
Yeah.
the 2 million, about. Some tribes were bigger, some were smaller. Well, believe me, in numbers we'll find out how big they are. But there's a lot of them. Now Aaron and his sons at this point, dad, 2 boys. That's Aaron and his sons. They will have more, down the line. So it's not a lot of Aaron and his sons. Yeah. Well, and I think he actually I believe he has 4.
He had 4, but
The two were bad, but
yeah.
But so Aaron and 4 boys. So not a huge amount. They will get to be. God is their inheritance, and God provides gifts for them. So it seems like they will eat well, depending on, now, are they sitting there saying, oh, I hope someone sins so we can get some meat? I want some meat. We know at least Aaron wasn't thinking that way. His two older sons, we're going to run into problems with those two.
So all this was told to Moses when he was on Mount Sinai. What about
this is now,
how to do the offerings, right?
well,
Or is this
he's
a
not
separate
on
thing?
Mount Sinai now.
That's what?
He's not on Mount Sinai at
And I
this
said,
point.
weren't all these rules given? How else did they know the rules?
Well, he got a lot of the rules. I don't know if he was given the details while he was up there. Or,
Well, first verse, the Lord called to Moses and spoke to him from the tent of meeting.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for catching that. Yeah, he was still Moses was still having meetings. So God gave a lot of information on Mount Sinai, but then filled in details because he was still meeting with Moses.
No wonder it took 40 days.
Yeah. Okay, verse 37, 38.
This is the law of the burnt offering, of the grain offering, of the sin offering, of the guilt offering, of the ordination offering, and of the peace offering, which the Lord commanded Moses on Mount Sinai, on the day that he commanded the people of Israel to bring their offerings to the Lord in the wilderness of Sinai.
This is the end of sacrifices. 7 chapters of sacrifices. This kind of summary. So yay,
This was the law of always.
yeah. So Leviticus 8, we're going to get into. We saw earlier instructions on consecrating the priest. Now it's time to do that. Okay, verses 1 through 3.
The Lord said to Moses, bring Aaron and his sons, their garments, the anointing oil, the bull for the sin offering, the 2 rams, and the basket containing bread made without yeast, and gather the entire assembly at the entrance to the tent of meeting.
Okay, so we learned a lot of details back in Exodus 29 on how to carry out this ceremony with Aaron and his sons, and again, Aaron, 4 sons. So now that the tabernacle is built, it's time to do this. This is a ceremony that's going to set them aside. Notice it says assemble all the congregation. Now there's people that think it meant assemble the leaders of the congregation because 2 million people been trying to see something happening in this little but I don't know. It says all. It's not a secret ceremony. Done behind closed doors. Same way today when we consecrate, lay aside someone for the ministry. It's not done in secret. It's done before the body. Verse 4 and 5.
Moses did as the Lord commanded him, and the assembly gathered at the entrance to the tent of meeting. Moses said to the assembly, this is what the Lord has commanded to be done.
Okay, so the people need to witness Aaron being given this spiritual authority. Aaron is going to lead them, and they need to have faith in him. Again, the same way today, we need to witness our leaders being consecrated in a public assembly. Acts 14:22 tells us that. And this ceremony is all God's plan, not Moses' plan. Okay, Melody, verse 6.
And Moses brought Aaron and his sons and washed them with water.
Okay, the ceremony wasn't for everyone. Aaron and his sons. Not even Moses is part of it. Moses, after these priests are consecrated, Moses steps back from the spiritual things. We're going to see him a lot in this chapter, but after this, he doesn't have anything to do with sacrifices or anything else. He is leading it, and then his job in this part is done. There were consecration ceremonies available to everybody, such as Nazirite vows. Anyone could take a Nazirite vow, but only Aaron and his sons and his descendants could take this, be consecrated in this way. And notice it's Moses bringing them. He seems to be acting as the envoy of God here. God, through his servant, is consecrating the tabernacle and the priests. So, first thing is cleansing. All the priestly ministries that they're doing will always begin with cleansing. And this is a cleansing that they are going to receive first. It says, you shall wash them. They didn't wash themselves, they received a washing. Some believe that this washing was like a full immersion, like a full bath. And this full cleansing is a one-time thing. From then on, they will only need to cleanse their hands and feet. So it's just at the consecration that everything's cleaned. Verses 7 through 9. Thank you.
And he put the tunic on him, girded him with a sash, clothed him with a robe, and put the ephod on him. And he girded him with the intricately woven band of the ephod, and with it tied the ephod on him. Then he put the breastplate on him, and he put the Urim and the Thummim in the breastplate.
And verse 9, sorry. Verse 9.
Oh, 9 too. Okay. And he put the turban on his head. Also on the turban, on its front, he put the golden plate, the holy crown, as the Lord had commanded Moses.
Okay, notice we went from them to him. Went from Aaron and his sons, and this is just Aaron now, the high priest. And any time once Aaron dies, they need to appoint a new high priest from his descendants through, it keeps going, a descendant of Aaron. And every time they consecrate a new high priest, they go through all of this again. We saw the clothes back in Exodus 28. He had to be clothed in the clothing given by God. In the same way, we need to be clothed in Jesus, in his righteousness. They're given by Jesus, and we receive them. Verses 10 through 13.
Moses,
Oh,
I'm sorry.
yeah, go ahead.
Moses then took the anointing oil and anointed the tabernacle and all that was in it and consecrated them. And he sprinkled some of it on the altar 7 times and anointed the altar and all its utensils and the basin and its stand to consecrate them. Then he poured some of the anointing oil on Aaron's head and anointed him to consecrate him. Next, Moses had Aaron's sons come near and clothed them with tunics and girded them with sashes and bound caps on them, just as the Lord had commanded Moses.
Okay, so notice first, they sprinkle on the non-living things. Sprinkle the holy oil on non-living things. Things that were set apart for service for God. And then it's time to anoint Aaron and his sons. And again, when it says sprinkle, it's sprinkle. When it says pour, it means pour. Kind of like if you watch football and they take the Gatorade. Poured. And he's dressed in all the fancy stuff. And they're pouring oil over him. What a mess.
It's like he was shortchanged.
Yeah.
not getting that oil on it.
Right?
Not wasting oil.
Yeah.
Did he have
Can you imagine
tomatoes
putting
back
it back
in?
on later? You know, it's dried now and then the oil.
And we're not done with all this stuff. Verses 14 through 17.
Then he brought the bull of the sin offering, and Aaron and his sons laid their hands on the head of the bull of the sin offering. And he killed it, and Moses took the blood, and with his finger put it on the horns of the altar around it, and purified the altar, and poured out the blood at the base of the altar, and consecrated it to make atonement for it. And he took all the fat that was on the entrails, and the long lobe of the liver, and the 2 kidneys with their fat. And Moses burned them on the altar. But the bull and its skin and its flesh and its dung he burned up with fire outside the camp, as the Lord commanded Moses.
Okay, we saw descriptions of all this back in Exodus. The washing was only part of symbolic cleaning. Now they had to clean their sin. This was a sin offering. And again, Aaron and his sons had to symbolically transfer their sins to the bull. And they did this by not just putting their nice little hands on it, they leaned on that bull. They were like, get this out of me onto him. The sin had to be transferred. Next, the altar is sanctified. The best of the bull is burnt before the Lord, and the rest of it taken outside of the camp and completely burned up. There could be nothing left from the sin offering. Verses 18 through 21. Betty, that would be you. 18 through 20, yeah.
Is this me? Okay. Then he slaughtered the ox and the ram, the sacrifice of peace offerings, which was for the people. And Aaron's sons handed the blood to him, and he sprinkled it around on the altar. As for the portions of fat from the ox and from the ram, the fat tail and the fat covering, and the kidneys and the lobe of the liver, they now placed the portions of fat on the breast, and he offered them up in smoke on the altar. But the beast, breast, and the right thigh Aaron presented as a wave offering before the Lord, just as Moses had commanded.
Okay, same thing, only it's a ram this time. They're having to do it again. These 2 sacrifices symbolize total commitment. All burned up. All my sin is given to God. I don't keep any of it. So verses 22 through 24.
Then he presented the other ram, the ram for the ordination, and Aaron and his sons laid their hands on its head. Moses slaughtered the ram and took some of its blood and put it on the lobe of Aaron's right ear, on the thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot. Moses also brought Aaron's sons forward and put some of the blood on the lobes of their right ears, and on the thumbs of their right hands, and on the big toes of their right feet. Then he sprinkled blood against the altar on all sides.
This doesn't sound like a really clean ceremony, does it? Throwing blood all over the place.
And oil, mix the two, you know, it's like,
Yeah.
I mean, the oil probably kept the blood from drying out and kicking on the skin, though.
Yeah. I know, I'd be thinking, oh, get me to a bath right away.
yeah.
So after the atonement for sin, they had done a sin offering, then they did a burnt offering. Now it's time for the actual sacrifice and ceremonies that will do the consecration. And again, they lay hands on the ram, and then they do the sacrifice. But then they take some of the blood and put it on parts of their bodies. We saw this before. Do you remember what it symbolized to put blood on their ear?
So they would listen to God.
Or they hear differently. They hear something, they hear different way.
Those are, yeah. They'd hear and obey God, basically. So yeah. What about the thumb?
It's the work.
Yeah.
It look differently because it looks.
Yeah. So everything they do belongs to God. And what about their big toe?
Wherever they go.
Wherever they go. Made me think, whatever they do. Okay. This is a chunk. Verses 25 through 29.
He took the fat and the fat tail and all the fat that was on the entrails and the lobe of the liver and the 2 kidneys and their fat in their right thigh. From the basket of unleavened bread that was before the Lord, he took 1 unleavened cake and 1 cake of bread mixed with oil and 1 water, and placed them on the portion of the fat and on the right thigh. He then put all of them on the hands of Aaron and on the hands of his sons, and presented them as a wave offering before the Lord. Then Moses took them from their hands and offered them up in smoke on the altar with the burnt offering. They were an ordination offering for a soothing aroma. It was the offering of fire to the Lord. Moses also took the breast and presented it as a wave offering before the Lord. It was Moses' portion and the ram of the ordinance, just as the Lord had commanded Moses.
Okay. So the wave offering. So again, when they're doing a wave offering, the actions are you're giving things to the Lord, and then you're receiving things back. That's why the wave offering.
Okay, that was a question that I wanted to ask you back up here in verses 18 through 29 through 21. Mine says a soothing aroma. In there it reads, a burnt offering for a soothing aroma. It was the offering of fire to the Lord. And then they have the word capitalized. And then over here, again, it was presented as a soothing aroma to the Lord, capital L-O-R-D. Okay. So is that where it gets, you're giving it to God and then God is sending you back blessings from that aroma?
That would kind of be the implication. And whenever it's capital L-O-R-D, that's God's personal name. That's his relational name with us.
Okay.
So, and we see that a lot in the Old Testament. So, and a pleasing aroma, or however you said it, means that it's something that God is pleased with. That God is saying, good job. And it makes him happy. Because now some of the stuff in human noses doesn't smell so good when you completely burn up meat and everything else. That doesn't smell so great.
Well, the skins with it.
Yeah. So, but a pleasing aroma to God is something that makes him happy. Okay, verse 30. Where did we end?
You.
Me. Okay. That's true. You did read last. Okay. See, I did too. Then Moses took some of the anointing oil and of the blood that was on the altar and sprinkled it on Aaron and his garments, and also on his sons and his sons' garments. So he consecrated Aaron and his garments and his sons' garments with him. So the blood wasn't enough on the altar. They had to mix it with you all. And then they throw it on those nice clothes. They sprinkle it on those nice clothes. So not only, and again, this was sprinkled, not poured this time. So it's not a carry picture thing. It's sprinkled. But still, it's sprinkled on those nice new clothes. They've never been worn.
No dry flavors back then.
No dry cleaners.
No. Yeah. So this mixture of blood and oil must have stained those garments. as they are serving as priests, it would serve as a reminder that they are consecrated.
Well, can you imagine the smell? Did they wear these garments again?
Oh, yeah,
Oh, yes.
that was their,
Yeah.
Oh, those are work uniform.
yeah, that was.
It's like Betty says, we're glad we're here.
Yeah, they didn't have a second set.
And I haven't run into anything about washing their
Yeah.
stuff.
But God likes so much cleanliness.
After a while, they probably stood up by themselves.
Oh, no.
I don't know. I'll have to see if they had a thing about. We haven't.
Well, they were like feet to the sun in the weeks they were in the desert. So
Yeah,
got crunchy.
yeah. Okay, verses 31 and 32.
And Moses said to Aaron and his sons, boil the flesh at the entrance of the tent of meeting, and there eat it, and the bread that is on the basket of ordination offerings, as I commanded, saying, Aaron and his sons shall eat it. And what remains of the flesh and the bread you shall burn up in the fire, with fire.
Okay, so this is still a ram, and it's portions of it were given to Aaron and the other priests after other parts were done as a wave offering. Then it was boiled. Doesn't boiled meat sound yummy?
This one says,
And it had to be eaten that day. The eating came after the washing, after the blood atonement. The eating symbolizes the continued relationship with God. Any leftovers from the meal had to be burnt that day. Again, God needed a fresh relationship. They couldn't pass it on to anybody else. The relationship had to be individual. These are the last verses, so this is a good timing. Verses 33 through 36.
do not leave the entrance to the tent of meeting for 7 days until the days of your ordination are completed, for your ordination will last 7 days. What has been done today was commanded by the Lord to make atonement for you. You must stay at the entrance to the tent of meeting day and night for 7 days and do what the Lord requires, so you will not die, for that is what I have been commanded. So Aaron and his sons did everything the Lord commanded through Moses.
How many days?
Sit there in those clothes.
Do you think there's an emphasis on? How many times did we see 7 days? So every day, everything we saw in these verses, every day for 7 days. So the pouring the oil and the blood sprinkling and yeah, and wonder if they're getting tired of meat. Boiled meat. And it had to be Moses doing the sacrifice because Aaron and his sons were not consecrated until after the full 7 days. 7 is the number of perfection. So it symbolized a full and perfect consecration. So something interesting. Have you noticed something missing from all this? Where's prayer? We haven't seen one prayer in all this. It doesn't mean it didn't happen.
I can kind of see now, Moses taught them all these things, so I can see why he could leave them in charge. I mean, they had an accountability after he gave them.
Yeah.
That's what the Lord said to
Yeah.
do, but, so Moses had to know all those things that those priests did.
And then it kept saying the Lord's commanded Moses and all of this, and my little footnote says in the whole book of Leviticus, nearly 1/3 of the command is in this book. I mean, in this chapter.
Yeah. And
So
again,
Moses
Moses would be getting this from his meetings with God. So, yay, we got through 2 chapters again. Okay, so prayer requests quickly. I have on here for the family of Darnell Calhoun, who is a Riverside County Sheriff that was shot while he was performing his duties, my dear friend is his aunt, and said he had an infectious laugh. He was just such a godly man. His faith was so important to him, and he shared his faith freely with other deputies. And he leaves behind a pregnant wife and 2 young sons. So, then prayers for our nation to return to the one living God, Son, Jesus, Savior, and be empowered by the Holy Spirit. Bonnie, safe travels for son Chris in Salt Lake City. Safety and wisdom for friend's son.
She's in Arizona with her sister who's going through a divorce.
Okay. Wednesday we have His Little Feet International Choir coming. That should be a real treat. Amber's friend Micah.
They call me, but I've never.
Micah. And her family, their babies.
He's just sick, but the family just needs a lot of prayer. She's trying to get closer to God, and the husband is fighting it tooth and nail. So but she watches all of our all the live preaching, and so she's been trying and doing like the Right Now Media to listen to the Bible studies. So just pray that continues and that she stays strong with all of it.
Yeah.